Hello class, and congratulations on attending Solution Design 904. My name is Dale Deerdorf. I'm your instructor and facilitator for the session, and this is going to be your first video lecture. This is going to be the Module 1 lecture, and it is on creating radically successful entrepreneurial businesses. And it's based on a book, actually a couple books that were written by Eric Rice. Now, Eric has put together a book called The Lean Startup, and this is one of the textbooks that I've got set up for you to read. It is a very comprehensive book on entrepreneurship, and it walks through his journey, his I'll call it transition, as he tried to understand why the management structure of a traditional managed company was so radically different if he tried to apply that to an entrepreneurial startup or an entrepreneurial venture. So there's a lot of what I'll call really homegrown information in here on entrepreneurship, on how to really structure a company, and this opens up a radically different way to try to manage, I'll call it uncertainty, the chaos that can happen in an entrepreneurial venture or an entrepreneurial startup. So that's one of the reasons that we've got this book set up for you. Now, it was originally published in 2011. He has since come out with another book called The Startup Way in 2017, which elaborates a little bit more on it. But historically, what I want you to do is I really want you to read The Lean Startup. This is one of the textbooks that we've got for you for the session. And the reason that I think that it's really critical is that it starts to unveil or pull away at entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship to show you certain characteristics, traits, behaviors, the things that happen to entrepreneurs, and he tells the story in a very captivating way. And he is one of those entrepreneurs that has started many startups, has collapsed them, and put together a process that I think is radically different from what you're going to see from other traditional types of entrepreneurs. And we're going to explore that. We're going to build into that. So let's just jump into the introduction. The big thing I want you to know is that this book is broken down into different sections. So there are three major sections, and they're called Vision, Steer, and Accelerate. And within each one of those sections, he has many, many different areas that we're going to pull at. So we're going to explore a lot of different areas in there. But one of the things that he really talks about is integrating lean manufacturing techniques or lean manufacturing leadership and management philosophies into the entrepreneurship model. And that is not something that has been there previously. And by doing that, it allows him to really focus on continuous innovation to create radically successful businesses. It really takes you to a different level. So those of you that are familiar with some of the lean manufacturing techniques from Toyota and from other companies in Japan and how they applied that, they went from philosophically certain types of, I'll call it mentalities or paradigms for how we have big batches versus small batches. Looking at things from I'll call it an experiment standpoint rather than a large production run. That philosophy is something that he has flowed into the entrepreneurship model, and that's why he's kind of given us 5 areas to explore, these new areas. And we're going to pull at each one of those. Entrepreneurs are everywhere. He's going to talk about everybody having the opportunity to be an entrepreneur if you want, and that they're all around us because of his definition of what an entrepreneur is. So once we get into that definition, you'll start to see that you not only fit the model for an entrepreneur, but a lot of other people around you do also, even though they may not know that they have philosophically an entrepreneurial either background or are working as an entrepreneur or intrapreneur within their own companies. So we've got entrepreneurs are everywhere. Entrepreneurship is management. And we're going to, in the next page, we're going to talk about that and how entrepreneurship and management are 2 different philosophies, but they are linked together. And we'll talk about how that dichotomy actually isn't intuitive, but that it actually exists. And then we're going to talk about validated learning. He talks about lessons learned that you pick up as you run and collapse, as you succeed and you fail in startups, and how all of that learning can be validated. And he'll show you a philosophy for that. He's got a 3-step process that we're going to go through called Build, Measure, Learn. And that validated learning is part of that learning process. And then we've got another final piece which is called innovative or innovation accounting, and how that is very, very different from the typical philosophy we have for accounting. So innovation accounting takes us down a different path. We're going to be able to pull at all these areas, and we're going to explore traditional and general management practices versus the new ones that we're going to be introduced to from here. Now, the philosophy for our course is entrepreneur leadership or entrepreneurship, leading entrepreneurs. This is really going to give you the opportunity to understand, especially when we talk about entrepreneurs being everywhere. The concept of entrepreneurship includes, and anyone who works within the definition of, from his perspective, a startup. And a startup to him is a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And that's the key. That extreme uncertainty means high risks, stronger demands, things that your customer is changing their mind. So there's scope change, flows in how we do things. It's just this constant evolution. And what happens is, if you try to take a traditional mindset for leadership and management and float that or flow that into an entrepreneurial mindset, it doesn't work because of that extreme uncertainty, because people are wired a little differently. And we'll talk more about that. He also talks about entrepreneurship is management. Entrepreneurship requires a new kind of management, specifically geared, from a concept of extreme uncertainty. That underline that's one key term we're going to come back and keep talking about. He also states that a startup exists to learn how to build sustainable businesses. That's the goal, that's the philosophy. That this learning can be validated by running frequent experiments. And experiments are something we're going to pull at and show you how you run an experiment in an entrepreneurial environment. And at what point in there do you pivot and move on to something else because you've identified that this is not going to be a venture that's going to be successful? Or do you pivot and move into another direction that's immediately in front of you, almost like that self-correcting you can do on a steering wheel in the car to keep yourself headed down the right direction? And we're going to run into this on the next slide, or a rocket ship where you've tuned everything in, you light the fuse, and it goes. Okay, so we've got two different philosophies that we're going to explore. And that validated learning, that startup exists, remember, to learn how to build sustainable businesses. And a sustainable business is one that can continue to grow, that can continue to evolve, can put together new products, can move into new markets. And then the philosophy of build, measure, and learn. This is an activity that's almost, I'll call it tuned for continuous process improvement. It really is a lean philosophy that he's identified and designed here. And it gives you the ability to make those course corrections off of an experiment, moving in, I'll call it, a positive direction, a continuous process improvement philosophy. And then innovation accounting, as we talked about before, it measures the progress by setting up milestones and by prioritizing work and holding people accountable. Those three things are things that many management styles do not stress enough. And he thinks that from an innovation perspective, innovation accounting encompasses that. So the first area we're going to go into is vision. So this is vision. Remember, there were three of them we were going to talk about. And in vision, he talks about the difference between two different philosophies, one being a rocket ship, and a rocket ship is launched into space. There are all these course corrections. Everything is programmed in. It's from a philosophy of a startup. It is already pre-programmed to succeed, and then you hit a switch, the rocket takes off, and as long as everything was correct, as long as everything was set up correct, it will make it to where you want it to go. But even the smallest error anywhere can cause that rocket ship to have an accident. And his philosophy is that we need to move away from startups being launched in that type of philosophy into something that's more like driving your car, where you need constant corrections. Events happen around you. You're doing course adjustments. Those adjustments are what we refer to as the chaotic nature of the business. It's that flexibility to be able to handle uncertainty as it's happening, this continuous uncertainty. And he talks about almost all startups really needing the ability to adjust that way. And he talks about how most startups, or many startups that he has been around, they fail because they behave like that rocket ship, that we're going to hit the switch, it's going to take off, and we're going to move forward. And the way he says that we need to move into this new philosophy is using a three-part scientific approach. And we're going to explore that in a little bit later, just to make sure that you understand. The big thing that I want you to focus on right now is called minimal viable product, and how important that is. The minimal viable product to get a customer to start working with it. And that may be someone that is an advanced person as far as an adopter. So you may have an early adopter that you're giving the opportunity to work with, and just so that you get it in their hands and almost like learning what's wrong with it as quickly as possible. So he talks about, from a lean perspective, these different areas that we're going to talk about. So start is one of them. The myth of loss of manufacturing capabilities. We keep talking about how we've lost manufacturing capabilities, but that's an inverse bell curve. On the other side of it, we've become more effective and more efficient from a productivity standpoint. We now have more capacity and we can spin up more output than ever before at an instant if needed. But we don't recognize that. We think that we have to build up into manufacturing capabilities. Those are manufacturing capabilities. Those exist for us already. So from a lean perspective, with lean thinking, lean draws on the knowledge and creativity of the individual workers. We actually talk to the workers and say, what could you do more effectively or efficiently? How can I break these barriers for you? What can we do to make things easier? And we bring batch sizes down into smaller batch sizes. Rather than running 1,000 parts or creating 1,000 parts and then putting 5 of them in front of a customer, let's create 6 and put 5 of those in front of a customer. Smaller batch times, just-in-time production, inventory control, really understanding that just-in-time production, and acceleration of cycle times if necessary. Sprints, as they're sometimes referred to as. And then progress measurement. Instead of measuring progress in manufacturing by the production of high-quality physical goods, okay, the lean startup measures progress through validated learning, and we're going to talk about what validated learning is. But many times you'll look at your performance on a daily basis and you'll say, boy, today was a good day. I was able to get a lot done. I really was able to, hunker down and get a lot of things covered. And yesterday was a terrible day because I had to attend 3 meetings and I was on the phone all day long and I was doing other things for other people, things like that. I didn't feel I was productive yesterday, but it may turn out that yesterday was a more productive day for the company, the enterprise, the startup, because everything that needed to be done was being covered. You may need to rethink how you look for, I'll call it success among the people that you manage and you lead. So we're going to talk about productivity when people are used to evaluate their product locally, and this is exactly what I was talking about. So if I look at it from a local standpoint, I may not seem productive, but globally, I may be doing the right thing and really helping move the company forward or the startup forward. So now, to kind of measure that, to kind of look at it, what Reyes has put together is this build, measure, learn feedback loop. And you can see that you build experiments, you measure metrics, and then you learn, and then you do that either pivot or persevere. Persevere means we just keep going. It's that check and balance, should we just keep going? And then it's a loop. We come back up. We create a hypothesis. The hypothesis tells us if we make this change, we should be better. We build, we do experiments. Those experiments we run. And that whole philosophy, this whole loop that we're talking about is an entrepreneurial venture. It's that whole piece. That short term and that pivot is something that isn't typically done. Many times what we do is we stay on the same track until either we fail or we succeed. We only see the opportunity for one or the other. And what he's talking about is creating a feedback loop that gives you the ability at a certain point to plant your foot in the ground and, as he refers to it, spin and start to pivot. Do we need to make that turn, that course correction? And I guess a great metaphor for me would be if you're in a sailboat and you're trying to get from one place to another. and you've got all these different things that are happening. You've got the waves moving against you. You've got the wind coming in. You've got other traffic that you may have to go around. Well, anybody that sails will tell you it's never just set the compass to 270 degrees and we're going to go here to get there. There are course corrections that are required all the time. More sail, less sail, a little bit direction here, a little bit of how do we get around, how do we make course corrections. He is really talking about, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, as a leader, you need to be able to help make those corrections. You need to be able to help adjust and move your organization as you continue to move forward. The next piece after start is going to be define. Now, define is the one we're going to talk about, the innovation factory. A company's only sustainable path for long-term economic growth is to build what he refers to it as an innovation factory. Many times you've got companies that have R&D areas, they've got skunk works, or they've got different areas that they use for creating new disruptive innovations. But he says that an innovation factory is one that creates disruptive innovations on a continuous basis, and that you need to have that capability within your startup. There needs to be a small group of people or a group of people that are focused on how do we improve things from a disruptive standpoint? How can we create disruptive innovations that allow us to continue growing whatever our design, our product, our process is, keep moving it forward. And he also talks about what we refer to as the culture and systems. You cannot have leaders that think that they are Caesar and they look at things and they make decisions by either a thumbs up or a thumbs down type of mentality. He talks about how disruptive that is and how terrible that is, especially in an innovative culture. That in an innovation or an idea creating culture, you need to create a system so that the teams can move and innovate at the speed of what he refers to the experimentation. Okay? That means that they need to be able to, at an instant, say, hey, we want to go try something, and be able to stop what they're doing and go off and explore that. And you'll find there's a term out in some of the lean manufacturing areas called proto-storming. And this is very similar to proto-storming, the ability to prototype something and brainstorm it at the same time, and then to find out where it fails immediately and be able to adjust, start to course correct, and move forward. He talks about lean thinking defining value as the providing benefit to the customer. That is the biggest thing about lean, is that how do we provide the best bang for the buck for our customer? That's where we want to go for. And if a startup is focused on that and they understand who is their customer or customers, and they're adjusting their philosophy and moving towards that, they will be successful. He sees that as the definition of a startup. Now we're going to talk about validated learning. So that learn perspective of it. Validated learning is not after the fact rationalization of a good story designed to hide failure. It's a rigorous method for demonstrating progress when one's embedded in the soil of extreme uncertainty, which startups are constantly inside. That means that you are documenting things as they're happening. You're hypothesizing. You're saying, if we change the color of this, we anticipate seeing more customers, or we anticipate it being an easier product to manufacture. Let's go test that quickly. Let's go find out. You've got a rationalized method for trying to create what he refers to as empirical knowledge that you demonstrate. Okay? And this is something that's very different from a traditional company that might run an entire project and then say, now we want to capture lessons learned. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? You're not capturing it at the moment. This is talking about empirically capturing things as they're happening, documenting them. The philosophy of an experiment is that you watch, you keep your eyes on what's happening, and you, in essence, are telling other people around you this is working or it isn't, or what's happening. Okay? So the question is not can this product be built, but is can we build a sustainable business around the set of products or services that we're designing? There's always that philosophy of a sustainable business, because a sustainable business is one that grows, it continues to make profit, it is one that is not failing. If it is not moving in that direction, if you are not building a sustainable business, when it comes to that pivot, You may need to pivot and say, we have to shut this startup down. The philosophy is that it is there to make money and to move forward in a positive direction, but you have to remember your customer base is going to drive that. Now, the experiment phase, he's talking about a couple different philosophies here. The two most important assumptions entrepreneurs make are, one, the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis. Those two pieces together give you an understanding of if you are going in a successful direction. So the value hypothesis is to test whether a product or service really delivers value to the customers who are using it. If it isn't providing that value, then your customer base isn't going to be there. So that's a go, no-go decision. If you are running into a problem of we are not providing value to our customer, then the pivot's got to be, how do we make that happen? How do we create that? And then the growth hypothesis is test how new customers will discover a product or service. How is it that we get new customers? How will they see this? There are many, many examples of companies that failed that had a great idea, a great product, a great venture that they did. Startup was perfect. They had done initial suggestions that customers were going to drive to them like crazy. They went into the startup phase and nobody showed up. Nobody bought the product. They had not understood how to connect with the customer. And unless you're a company like Apple, where people drive to you, you have this issue. You need to make sure you understand how you can grow, that growth hypothesis. So those two pieces are extremely important. Now, when we talk about these experiments that we're running, he says that there are 4 questions that really need to be asked. Do customers recognize that they have a problem, that they have the problem you are trying to solve? If the answer is yes, then you have a customer base that you can kind of, tap into. If they don't, you need to create that. If there was a solution, would they buy it? Because many times I've got solutions to problems, but they're too expensive, or the people just don't really care. It is a problem for them, but it's not that big a problem. Okay? Number 3, would they buy it from us? If the answer is yes, you're still moving in the right direction. If the answer is no, then you've got barriers. You need to figure out how to adjust, how to change. How do we create something that's different? And then finally, number 4, can we build a solution for that problem? And if we can, you should. Success is not delivering a feature. Success is learning how to solve the customer's problem. And the customer's problem changes. Once you solve one problem, there will be something else. There will be another problem that the customer will always have. Now we're going to go into part number 2. Okay, vision was number 1. Now we're going to go into steer. And steer is exactly like it sounds. We're going to take and we're going to start to talk about how do we move, minimizing the total time. He's going to talk about in a startup, many people have training that emphasize one element of the feedback loop, but having the best business idea or the best design product isn't enough. We need to focus our energies on minimizing the total time through the feedback loop. That entire time. Not just one element of it. You have to look at the whole picture, because sub-optimizing every little piece is very timely, it's very expensive, and startups can't handle that. We have to look at things from an MVP standpoint, as he refers to it. Minimum viable product. What is the minimal functionality that I could provide the customer and they would still say this meets my requirement and solves the problem, and that I'm willing to buy that. That's the first step of a startup. That should be what it is. It doesn't have to be fine-tuned to the point where you've eliminated every particular piece. It doesn't have to have that level of clarity to it. He talks about the MVP. It's a version of the product that enables a full turn of the build, measure, learn loop, so you can completely get through the loop with a minimal amount of effort and the least amount of development time. How quickly can we move through this cycle, this this proto-storming philosophy that we talked about? So if you take a peek at this, so if the idea starts, then you build it, then you create a product, you measure it, you get data, you learn from that, and you cycle through that. How do you optimize that whole flow, not just one piece of it, the whole flow? And he talks about learning milestones. So when we talk about learning, we have milestones for learning. We set it up and we say after the build cycle, or during the build cycle, I need to know what milestones we have for each one of these areas. And that's how you drive a plan. That's how you steer a schedule. That's how you create that development cycle and that time, is by focusing on these milestones, learning milestones. Inside of that, now the first piece is going to be LEAP. LEAP is a leap of faith where you make assumptions. That the startup plan are a leap of faith assumptions. Two most important assumptions are that the value hypothesis that we talked about previously and the growth hypothesis, those two have to be in alignment. If either one of those is not valid, if either one of those assumptions is wrong, then you are not going to be successful with a startup. He talks about the example leap of faith where you break or make your business. In the iPod business, one of those leaps of faith was that people would pay for music. People did pay, do continue to pay, and that's how iPod stayed in business. That's how that whole market was kind of put together for Apple. So go and see for yourself means that the business should not be based on deep first-hand knowledge until you have seen something for yourself firsthand. We talk about going to other companies, doing some sort of assessment as to where you fit production-wise, where you fit design-wise. If you've got a startup, you should be visiting other startups. You should be looking at what other startups are doing. How do they design? How do they build? How do they deliver to their customer? How do they understand requirements? You should be monitoring where you fit versus where other people fit. These are required in any business, but especially in a startup. You need to see what other people are doing. Now, the test piece from an MVP perspective, that minimal viable product, it helps entrepreneurs process that process of learning as quickly as possible, which means that as soon as I have information, as soon as I have data, I am sharing that. I am looking for that fastest way through the feedback loop, but I am letting everybody know what's working. How do we adjust so that everybody in the whole mix, in the whole process, is understanding the information at the same time. And remember that, as he calls it, the MVP is only the first step on a journey of learning. There are multiple steps in this journey of learning. You're learning all the way through the system. You need to make sure that you understand that. Okay? Now, also within the minimal viable product, we've got two other things. We've got the concierge MVP, and that's a personalized service that is not a product but a learning activity designed to test the leap of faith's assumptions to the company growth model. This could be a test scenario. This is where we kind of run it through to see, have we captured all of the requirements? Are we satisfying what we think are all the requirements that the customer wants? And if necessary, we're making those pivots, those adjustments to try to get ourselves on course. Are we aligned with our strategy? Is there something we need to do that will allow us to move and make more significant growth? So that's the concierge MVP, and then that rule within the MVP, the MVP rule. When building your MVP, remove any features, processes, or efforts that do not contribute directly to the learning you seek. Bare bones. It's the difference between a Volkswagen and a Cadillac. From a functional standpoint, if all I'm looking for is transportation for one person from one place to another, the Volkswagen is probably a better solution than a Cadillac that has all of these other extra features. I don't need to take 4 or 6 people. I only need to take one person. Maybe it's a Yugo that we need to use. So that's the MVP rule. You need to remember that. You're trying to build a great high quality product, and the only way to do that is to really review what is happening. Now, we offer things in a couple different ways. One is to early adopters, and early adopters are those people that will go out and they will take something before it is ready to be marketed and sold, and they'll say, let me try it. Beta users of software are examples of people like this. And you ask these people for, give me feedback on what my product, my service, my startup is doing. And they're talking here that 80-20 rule. If 80% of the solution is there, you can put it in front of somebody, and those early adopters are the ones that usually will give you information on what they would rather see or what is missing that they would like to have in your product. Now, the next piece we're going to talk about is WOOT testing, or WOOT, the Wizard of Oz testing. And this is testing that is done, and it's almost artificial in its nature, similar to the movie The Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the machine. He's making course corrections and things like that. This is on a micro scale, something that is very efficient if it is done in an unusual way. And I mean, the use of this prototyping philosophy is you fake in functionality so that you would look at something and say that there's all of this functionality, some of it is faked in. It isn't really there. So it's almost artificial in its nature. We're going to have you test this one piece. We show you 4 or 5 areas of functionality, but we're only exploring one. So that's WOOT testing, or Wizard of Oz testing. And if you look for examples of this, most of them are going to be in the software arena. It tends to fall into that kind of philosophy. There are not too many hard products like cars or airplanes or things like that that were designed that you can point to where there are stories for WOOT testing or you know, the Wizard of Oz type of environment. A final go away for you from an early adopter standpoint is that you want high quality experiences. Everything you do with your customers should be focused on quality. High quality is something that people will remember. If you go to a restaurant and you get a steak, or you get a lobster, or you get something that you really, really enjoy, and the quality of it is excellent. If you enjoy sushi and you go and you get great sushi because the quality of the fish is there. These are the kind of experiences that you want to create for your customer, and you need to understand that. So you need to be able to look at your customers' philosophies, focus on producing high quality experiences for your customer. That is what a startup should be looking for. So when we talk about the lean startup, all these philosophies are blending together. You're starting to see, as we're moving through this, it's a philosophy and mentality for managing and leading from an entrepreneurial way that's very, very different from that single-minded or traditional mentality that you'll see within many, I'll call it, traditional leadership or management philosophies. This is really looking at extreme uncertainty, chaotic nature, and how do we give our customer the best bang for their buck? How do we bring that quality to them, and being able to shift at a moment? How do we create that? How do we make that pivot? How do we either keep going in one direction to make our company sustainable, or how do we adjust so that we either make that decision that it is not going to be sustainable and we need to leave it, or how do we, course correct to make those corrections necessary? So innovation accounting, when we talk about measuring things, is a new type of philosophy. And this is where you're actually looking at how do we validate learning. It's called innovation accounting. It's an alternative to traditional accounting designed specifically for startups, and begins by turning on that leap of faith assumptions. You need to turn on those leap of faith assumptions into a quantifiable model. How can I create that? And he says there are 3 steps to actually create this measurement. One is to use MVP to establish real data on where a company is right now. Where do we exist right now? What is our model? What is our ownership of the market? Where exactly are we right now? And then startups must attempt to tune the engine from the baseline towards the ideal. So now that I know what my current position is, I need to understand what my ideal position would be. And then that gap analysis between the two is what I want to close. After the startup has made those micro changes and product optimizations, it can move from its baseline towards the ideal company. And the company reaches a decision point, and it's either pivot or preserve. Okay? This innovation accounting framework is something that is not measured in a traditional company. A traditional company is going to measure things on ROI, return on investment, and sometimes they might explore return on innovation, return on inspiration, return on, those type of philosophies, but they usually don't have a quantifiable way to actually come up with an accurate measurement for it. Using MVPs gives you the ability to do that. Now that pivot or preserve or persevere, I love. If you're not moving the drivers of your business model in the right direction, you need to make what they refer to as that pivot. And they say to take your foot, plant it in the ground, and then you're going to shift. Which direction do we need to go? The pivot, by putting your foot in the ground, you know where you're at. You know where the baseline is, and then you can see the direction that you need to go. And you talk about the importance of innovation accounting. They say that only 5% of entrepreneurship is the big idea. Many people think that once I've got that idea, that's it. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, I have got it made. I can create the startup and everything's going to happen. It isn't. There's a business model that must be put together. And as you're working on your week 1 assignments for the ABOD assignment, you're going to see that the idea is already there. We're going to have you put together that lean canvas template. That lean canvas template is going to fill in data in all of these areas, and you're going to see how important it is to create that whole description of the business model. Okay? Now, there are types of pivots, and here's a whole list of the different types of pivots. There's a zoom in pivot, a zoom out pivot, customer segment pivot, customer need pivot, platform pivot, engine growth pivot, the channel pivot, and a technology pivot. When discovering, so technology pivot, when discovering a technology to achieve the same solution by using a completely different technology. Those are advances in technology. Each one of these is a type of pivot that you need to be thinking about from a perspective of your startup, because you will need at some point to do some different types of pivots to make that adjustment, to fine-tune things, to make it lean. To create a lean startup is going to require you to do that. Now, the third part is going to be accelerate, and you accelerate the feedback loop. How do we accelerate? What is that referred to as? Well, let's go take a peek. So the first thing is small batches versus big batches. Let's do smaller batches, higher quantity, faster to our customer, rather than doing a big batch, waiting for all the product to get in. So entrepreneurs don't need 10,000 pieces of something. They only need 5. Think about things from a batch standpoint. Examples of small batches versus large batches, letter folding, things like that. If you take a look at your startup and say, where can I reduce batch size? I don't need to hold quality product. I need quality product, and I need it just in time. How can I get just in time small batches of what I need? That eliminates a lot of that waste of storing things, of holding on to things that you may find out don't meet your requirements later on. So batch is one of them. The next area we're going to explore in this third phase, remember this is the third phase of accelerate, is grow. New customers come from actions of past customers. There are 4 primary ways past customers drive sustainable growth. This is what you need to focus on from your marketing perspective. This is what you need to focus on when you're looking at how do we keep customers engaged with us. 1, word of mouth. Word of mouth is worth its weight in gold. All it takes is one bad story about your product, your service, your, whatever the experience is that you're providing. And one bad comment is something that'll take you completely out of the market. You need good word of mouth. So you need to understand, what are customers saying about you? You need to find a way to understand what is it that they would say, okay? You want satisfied customers. You want them to be enthusiastic about your product. And as a side effort of the product's usage, fashion or status such as luxury goods, products drive awareness of themselves whenever they are used. So having a specific type of watch, having something that people see and go, oh, you're wearing that. Oh, I like that. How do you like that? Actually having that product, that service, whatever it is, at a position where people can see it is something that's very valuable for you. Number 3, through funded advertising. So we know what that is. That's where you actually take out ads and you fund advertising. And number 4, through repeat purchases or use. Subscriptions, voluntary repurchases, things like that. Now the next piece of it is going to be called adapt. Adapt is broken into two different areas, one of the most important discoveries of the lean manufacturing movement. You cannot trade quality for time. I love this philosophy because I used to tell people you can either have it right or you can have it right now. But I can't make it happen faster than I'm doing. You need to remember that. You can have it right or you can have it right now. You cannot trade quality for time. I can't make it better faster unless there's a different type of paradigm or paradox that I've found a way to break. But traditionally, that is one of the things you need to understand from an adapt standpoint. And then that adapt process to accelerate the lean startups need a process that provides that natural feedback loop. Remember that natural feedback loop we were talking about is what you're looking for. It is going to tell you that in certain places you need to slow down and in others you need to speed up. And unless you're looking at optimizing that entire cycle, you won't know where that is because you can't run at breakneck speed all the way through. Many times that's what causes problems for you. Now the next piece is going to be innovate. I love this because we talk about an innovation sandbox. And the innovation sandbox here is where you create a mechanism for empowering innovation teams out into the open. You create that opportunity, that environment where they can protostorm, where they can do whatever they want, and then you're forcing within this sandbox what we refer to as rapid iteration. Go run it now. Let's go find out what works now. Even if it's partial functionality, let's verify what works, what doesn't work, what should we be changing, what should we be doing. Making mistakes up front is cheap. That's great learning you get at an early point. The longer you wait to find a mistake, the more expensive it is to correct. So you need to remember those two philosophies. And then in closing, what I want you to do is I want you to take the book. I want you to take the Lean Startup, and from front to back, each page has got some great information for you. If you want, go ahead and pick up the second book as a follow-on book. But I want you to really look at this perspective for putting together a lean startup. It is a different, unique philosophy. As you are going through the chapters, as you're looking at this, remember that we're creating experiments. And we're running rapid scientific experiments to validate learning. It's a different philosophy, especially when you're working in an environment that has continuous iteration, chaos, and uncertainty. So this is the way you would solve that type of problem. This is the way we want you to start your, I'll call it the week one or the module one philosophy or mind change. We're going to break down some paradigms, so your paradigm paralysis is going to get pulled away, and we're going to start to introduce and expose to you some different things. That lean canvas template that you're going to be working with in module one all the way through module 4 is going to be an eye-opener for you, because the business canvas model that was there previously only opened up a portion of the information you're going to be able to put together. So remember, rather than wasting time creating elaborate business plans, create a lean startup. Have a great week. Congratulations on being included in this course. For the next 4 modules, you're going to see lectures that are going to open your eyes, drive you in different directions, and hopefully at the end provide you some epiphanies. My name is Dale Dierdorf. Have a great week. Goodbye.